Welcome to Unpolished but Called. I'm Kathrin Shaffer, and I'm your host. So this episode opens a new season of the podcast and a slower rhythm for the year ahead, including the Bible study that I just started this year. We'll be walking through together. But I wanted to pause here, not to restart, but to mark where we've been and where we're going. So I'm glad you're here. There's a particular kind of pressure that shows up after you finish something very meaningful. It does not shout, it does not announce itself dramatically. It settles in quietly and waits, asking a question that sounds harmless but carries weight. What now? So the 12 Apostles series is finished. Season 1 is behind us. That fact alone should feel satisfying. But endings rarely behave that neatly. Instead of relief, there's often an urge to hurry forward, to explain what comes next, to turn the ending into a launch before anyone has time to notice the pause. Faith spaces are especially good at rushing past moments like this. We love declarations and dramatic turns. We like tidy narratives that move from struggling to breakthrough in a straight line. We celebrate beginnings loudly and treat stillness as something suspicious, something that needs justification. But standing still after something formative is not a failure of imagination. It is often a sign that the work actually mattered. So season 1 of Unpolished but Called was not just a collection of episodes. It was learning how to speak without hiding. It was discovering what it meant to tell the truth about faith without polishing it into something palatable. It was practicing I do not know yet, without apologizing for it or rushing to fill the silence. And that kind of work leaves a mark. Intensity has a cost, even when it is holy. Growth stretches muscles you didn't know were being used. Finishing something like that does not always leave you energized. Sometimes it leaves you quiet, reflective, unsure how to describe what has changed, but certain that something has. And standing in that space can feel uncomfortable. It feels unfinished, unresolved, and resistant to tidy conclusions. There's no ribbon to cut, no clear next step to announce, just the awareness that you are still here. And that matters more than we tend to admit. Staying present after a season of formation takes restraint. It requires resisting the temptation to rebrand your exhaustion as vision. It asks you to sit with what you have learned long enough for it to settle into your bones instead of rushing it into content. So season 2 begins here. Not because everything is clear, but because clarity is not the requirement for faithfulness. Some things have changed. That needs to be said honestly. Systems have shifted. Rhythms have been simplified. This podcast now has structure that can be sustained rather than survived. There is less pressure to make every episode carry everything at once. Other things remain firmly in place. Scripture still matters more than slogans. Integrity still matters more than momentum. And obedience still matters more than optics. None of that was negotiable then, and it is not negotiable now. Standing does not mean stagnation. It means integration. Integration is quieter than innovation. It is the slow work of allowing what you have learned to reshape how you live rather than how you perform. It is less concerned with appearances and more concerned with alignment. Scripture offers language for this posture, even if we often skip past it. After listing armor and spiritual readiness, Paul does not conclude with a call to advance. He concludes with an instruction that sounds almost anticlimactic. And having done all, to stand. That line does not get quoted often. It does not fit well on a graphic, does not promise momentum or measurable results. It simply acknowledges that sometimes faithfulness looks like remaining upright after everything else has been done. Standing is what happens when the adrenaline fades and obedience remains. This is where many people quietly lose heart. Not in crisis, catastrophe, but in the middle spaces where faith becomes repetitive and progress is hard to measure. Standing does not come with applause, does not generate urgency. It requires patience, which is one of the least celebrated virtues in modern Christian cultures. Patience does not trend. It does not perform well. It rarely feels rewarding in the moment. But yet patience is where formation happens. Most of the people we admire in Scripture did not spend the majority of their lives in dramatic moments. They spent long stretches waiting, working, walking, and remaining faithful in obscurity. We tell their stories in highlight reels, but they lived them in years. Standing was not their failure, it was their faithfulness. And that perspective changes how we interpret our own seasons. When faith feels quieter, it is easy to assume something is wrong. When there's no visible forward motion, we start searching for reasons. We ask whether we have missed something, misunderstood something, or stalled out entirely. What if standing is exactly what obedience looks like right now? That question is uncomfortable because it removes our ability to measure progress quickly. It doesn't give us metrics. It does not let us announce accomplishments. It simply asks whether we are still here, listening, and willing. Standing is not passive. It is active presence. It is choosing not to flee when the work shifts from exciting to ordinary. So this season of the podcast is shaped by that understanding. Season 2 is not a restart. It is not a reinvention. It is a continuation marked by the deeper roots rather than louder declarations. The work ahead is quieter by design. It is meant to form rather than impress. It is built to last, not to spike. So as this year begins, many people feel pressure to become someone new, to optimize, to improve, to transform themselves quickly and visibly. That pressure seeps into faith, convincing us that if we are not advancing, we are regressing. Standing challenges that narrative. Standing says growth can be slow and still be real. Standing insists that faithfulness does not always announce itself. Standing acknowledges that some seasons are not about moving forward, but about staying anchored where you already are. So this posture will shape everything that follows. It will inform how Scripture is approached, how questions are held, and how faith is discussed. There will be space for wrestling, but not for theatrics. There will be honesty, but not urgency masquerading as conviction. That is the tone of season 2. The work now is not to run ahead, but to remain attentive, to notice what God is doing beneath the surface, to trust that standing is not wasted time, but essential time. And from that posture, the year unfolds. Something subtle happens when you stop rushing to define what comes next. Space opens, not empty space, but attentive space, where you begin to notice how much pressure you were carrying without realizing it. Pressure to be helpful, insightful, to keep pace with expectations that were never clearly spoken, but deeply felt. Standing interrupts that cycle. It allows you to admit that faith is not always fueled by momentum. Much of the time, it is sustained by presence. Presence with God, with Scripture, with the reality of your own limitations. So season 2 leans into that truth rather than away from it. This is a year shaped by formation, not frenzy. The episodes ahead are grounded intentionally, not because there's nothing urgent to say, but because urgency has dominated the conversation for too long. Faith has been packaged as something that must constantly escalate, expand, produce visible results. That is not how formation works. Formation works quietly. It reshapes desires slowly. It does not announce itself with before and after comparisons. It settles into daily decisions and ordinary obedience. Standing is where that work happens. And there is a particular courage required to stay with something when it no longer feels new. Novelty carries energy. Familiarity requires commitment. Many people begin strong and fade, not because they lack sincerity, but because they misunderstand what faithfulness feels like once excitement wears off. Standing teaches endurance without drama. Endurance is not flashy, does not feel triumphant most days. It feels repetitive, unspectacular, and occasionally discouraging. Yet endurance is where trust deepens, because it no longer depends on emotional reinforcements. Faith that lasts is not fueled by constant inspiration. It is sustained by conviction that does not need to shout. That conviction will guide this season. Conversations will be slower. Scripture will be allowed to speak without being rushed into application. Questions will be held without immediate resolutions. Silence will not be treated as failure. This approach is countercultural even within Christian spaces. It resists the pressure to always be producing, responding, advancing. It creates room for reflection, rest, and for honest engagement with the complexities of belief. Standing creates stability. Stability allows growth that does not collapse under pressure. Listeners who remain through the season are not being entertained, they are being invited into a steadier way of engaging faith. One that values depth over immediacy, integrity over optics, and presence over performance. And that invitation is not exclusive. It is simply honest. Many people are tired, not because faith has failed them, but because faith has been asked to perform in ways it was never meant to. It has been expected to motivate constantly, reassure instantly, and resolve quickly. Standing releases those expectations. It allows faith to breathe. It does not mean the year will be easy or free from challenge. Formation rarely is. There will be discomfort, conviction, and moments where remaining feels harder than leaving. And those moments are not signs that something has gone wrong. They are often signs that something is being refined. Standing does not eliminate struggle, it reframes it. Struggle becomes part of the work rather than evidence of failure. Questions become invitations rather than threats. Waiting becomes a discipline rather than a punishment. That reframing is essential for sustainable faith. Season 2 is built with that sustainability in mind. The rhythm is intentional. The pace is deliberate. The content is designed to meet people where they actually are, not where they feel pressured to appear. There is no expectations that listeners will feel inspired every episode. Inspiration is not the goal, formation is. Formation happens through repetition, honesty, and time. It requires showing up when nothing dramatic is happening. It asks for faithfulness when feedback is minimal and progress feels invisible. Standing supports that process. So as the year unfolds, episodes will return again and again to ordinary spaces, daily decisions, quiet obedience, uncelebrated faithfulness. These are not lesser topics. They are the substance of discipleship. The posture remains the same throughout, grounded, attentive, unhurried. Standing is not about resisting change, it is about resisting chaos. Change will come, growth will happen, but it will not be forced or rushed. It will be allowed to emerge organically, shaped by consistent engagement rather than sporadic intensity. That is the commitment of this season. If you are listening and you feel behind, standing is for you. If you are listening and you feel tired, standing is for you. If you are listening and you are not starting over, standing is for you. Faith does not require reinvention to remain alive. It requires presence. Standing is presence practiced over time. So season 2 begins here. Not because everything is resolved, but because resolution is not required to remain faithful. It begins with acknowledgement rather than announcement, with steadiness rather than spectacle. This is not the beginning of something flashy. It is the continuation of something honest. Standing is enough. And from here, we keep going, slowly, faithfully, and together. Before we close, I'll mention this once. If you want to walk through the Bible study connected to the season or find additional resources, you can find everything at kathrinshaffer.com. This podcast will always remain free, and if you're looking for ways to support the work, those options are there as well. Thank you for being here and for standing with me as this season begins.